Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Mokonaman at YouTube with another modelling video. Today I'm going to be building my second anime figure resin model kit. A cast job from e2046.com. This is a kit that I bought a long time ago intending to be my first resin kit. I got very cheap, a Hatsune Miku in bathing suit, quite a bit of flesh, quite a bit of parts, quite challenging. I was drawn to it because there was colour separation, eye decals and a finished image to go off. There is the challenge of, again, the colour separation, gluing the resin together, as well as the massive hair. Now you can definitely tell about the vintage of this kit being well over 5 years old, with the photo using the old base and accessories, as well as coming in a Tupperware plastic lunchbox. Nowadays they come in these yellow boxes with some sort of plastic hard blister pack like packaging inside, which is superior packaging. A lot of people are very fond of the old style Tupperware boxes, as they're ideal for storing, stacking and washing the parts in it. So you can just fill it up with water, detergent, scrub, wash and just leave it there for a while. And nonetheless you can keep some of your old containers, as I've done. I documented the packaging quite thoroughly to do a review and talk about how I was pretty pleased nothing got broken or damaged, as it's taken me far too long and the standards and procedures of the company's changed. A bit redundant, but interesting how it used to be once. All the parts are placed in the Chinese food container and scrubbed with a reasonable amount of warm water, a serrated sponge and dishwashing detergent. Once rinsed, it was allowed to soak in detergent water a second time around, rinsed the second time in water, and wiped and dried down on paper towel and allowed to air dry for about a day. Even though it looks like there's easy slots or some sort of male end and a female hole to peg everything together, they're quite inefficient and require pinning. Using the wave pin vise, I drilled holes and used 1.2mm metal wire and cheap super glue. The hair is quite complex in many pieces. It was attacked and glued together first. There was no intention, however, to pin and glue the pigtails directly to the head due to weight issue and the neck pigtails breaking. Now, learning my lessons from last time, the Madoka Magica mummy figure from also e2046. Putty is, to me, a polyester putty, and polyester putty etches and sticks very well to resin. It has a very little shrinking, it's quite smooth, sands back. Polyester putty is resin based, so with the application of it to resin and sanding it off resin, as well as application and sanding itself, a respirator should be worn during this process for your own health purposes. Also, even though you get a tiny amount of hardener, which you mix 1 part hardener to 50 part putty, mix a sufficient amount to get a solid colour. Failing to mix correctly will make your putty gooey and sticky. It will never harden and will require to be removed and remixed from scratch. So don't skimp on the hardener thinking it's just going to dry slower. It's not going to dry at all. Next is the face. The hair's a bit crisp. The face is well defined. Pretty nice casting. There is some faults here and there, some wide seams. There was just bogged with polyester putty. Sometimes the other side was lubricated with petroleum jelly and washed off at a later date to prevent it sticking to the other side. Now, I was reading a post regarding the criticism of e2046 Gundam and mecha kits being far too softly casted and losing definition and detail. It is true, e2046 does have a soft resin, and regarding a lot of the nubs and extrusions and flash that's not meant to be there, it's very easy to carve off and sand back with a knife, which is highly appropriate for GK kits. Quickly visiting back to the hair, I've added a magnet into the head by drilling a large hole and inserting a 6x2mm magnet in both the hair follicle and inside the head. The hair weighs quite a bit, so a further brass rod was inserted deep into the head and a hole added to the hair follicle to just merely balance and support the weight and the magnet holding it in place. There is some sort of hair tie that does cover the gap, though it works out in the end and balances quite well on the base. The hair was a further pain in the ass, being so big and heavy. It was not very practical to rig it, so I literally had to hold it one side, spray it on a plastic plate, flip it after drying and spray again. This really increased the painting time on this project. After initial primer was applied to the hair, as well as the rest of the figure, which was drilled in areas that glue would cover, mounted on skewers and painted, a few seams and imperfections did appear, as well as tiny minor ones in other areas of the figures. This was recovered in a second layer of polyester putty and sanded back a second time. The hair was a further pain in the ass, being so big and heavy. It was not very practical to rig it, so I literally had to hold it one side, spray it on a plastic plate, flip it after drying and spray again. This really increased the painting time on this project. After initial primer was applied to the hair, as well as the rest of the figure, which was drilled in areas that glue would cover, mounted on skewers and painted, a few seams and imperfections did appear, as well as tiny minor ones in other areas of the figures. This was recovered in a second layer of polyester putty and sanded back a second time. After a few days to allow it to dry and absolutely fully harden, the second layer of polyester putty was sanded back at 300 and 400 grit sandpaper wet. Majority of the sanding of this kit has been done wet in the container submerged to prevent dust and breathing in. I was able to do this in public and not wear a mask. The rest of the dry sanding at home with a respirator. This followed by the entirety of the primer and the resin being sanded with 1000 grit sandpaper to get rid of any texture from airbrushing from the primer and remove any superfine imperfections for the flesh tone. As I've learnt a lot from the mummy figure and it looks quite flat, I wanted to do some shading and definition work on all the parts, including flesh. The hair and other areas was starting with a very dark blue, building up to a medium blue with tiny highlights of light blue where light would catch. The flesh used the Mr. Colour Beautiful Girl colour set, two colours, quite a dark orange and a medium flesh orange. This was highlighted using character flesh by Mr. Hobby. This gave free tones that went from a blushed flesh look to quite a pale highlight and gave it a bit more interest than my first resin figure. I feel that the flesh was done hands down alright. I was very happy with it. When I ruined a few parts during assembly, I was able to touch up with a mix of character flesh 1 and 2 seamlessly. After all the lacquer painting was done, I gave everything 2 coats of Future Floor gloss acrylic. Tamir acrylic thinned 50/50 would also do. Eyes were applied as decals. They sit very nice, worked very well. Absolutely love them. The mouth was painted a dark scarlet red and the tongue a pink. The eyelashes and all that came with the eye decals. The bikini was airbrushed one colour, masked, painted another colour, and then a heavy white filter applied for a faded, interesting look. Brass was put up inside the feet, and we drilled out an e2046 clear base to apply. Everything was assembled using epoxy glue. I've made quite a few mistakes, and we will get into that in the assembly process. Mistake number 1, I put far too much putty and paint in the joints that the glue's going to attach with the pins, and epoxy glue melts and absolutely ruins paint immediately and just smudges it. I smudged some of the outer edge of the leg, but this was touched up via an airbrush. Not too much of a problem. Most of the pieces pinned well together, but I rushed it and tried to get it done in a few hours and kind of ruined the bikini bottom with a slight gap. Tried to glue it, fell apart, glue dried, tried to remove it, tried to glue it again, and it formed ever so the slightest amount of a gap. There was also a gap in the top bikini, which was fixed with 2-part epoxy putty, and unfortunately it cracked and left a tiny amount of flesh in the left corner just above the breast. This was easily fixed by gluing back down and touching up via a brush. I, funnily enough, read an article and watched a work in progress assembly of a very large G Systems or expensive brand of resin model kit by Matt Mosaic, very famous for his resin models, especially in the Gundam field. He talked about spending almost like a week assembling, just gluing one piece at a time and really taking it slow not to ruin chip paint. He says he sometimes chips paint and needs to do touch up afterwards. It's just so easy to mess up, so it's something that in a future project assembly needs to be taken a lot slower, deadline or not. Unfortunately, that seam does ruin any prospect for competitions or whatnot. I might assemble and fill seam lines if they're very terrible and resort to masking instead of relying heavily off color separation. But all of that set aside, fairly happy with the palette, fairly happy with the base. Most of it is not too bad. Very close up, tiny smudges, but the future kit will be far more superior. I'm aiming up and planning to build one immediately. I do plan on publicly displaying this and talking about the errors that I made and how I've learnt by it, and we will see how much further I improve. This was a lot older, deformed, warped kit. It was a little harder to handle. It was very cheap, around $20, and what I had to work with, I can't be more happy with the finish. It would have been amazing if the gluing was not an issue and I didn't have the gap in the bikini, but it is what it is. Another experiment I would like to try instead of pinning, I would like to use wood dowel, about 3-4 mil for gluing. Forgot to mention, everything was tidied up with a few coats of matte clear by Tamiya. I purposely left it slightly glossy, being, you know, a wet beach out of a swimming pool ocean look. Kind of cool. That is all for this build. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, until next time, catch you guys later. Stay tuned for further builds, tanks, Gundams, tutorials, reviews, product demonstrations, the whatnot, the usual, the dirty and the ugly. And stay tuned as always. See you later.